All right, so today we have with us Sons of Liberty, Rick Santorum. And folks, for more information regarding Rick, his campaign, and everything that he stands for, his values, his morals, I've spent some time perusing through his website today, ricksantorum.com. That's RickSantorum. And one of the things that I want you to keep in mind here is the reason that we brought him on is because we've seen that he's become a moral champion. You look at his website, there's no ashamedness about Christian values and morals. And folks at the Sons of Liberty understand that in order for us to have any type of victory, whether it be in economics, whether it be in education, whether it be in family, it's going to be based on the Judeo-Christian God. That's what we exalt, that's who we promote, because God is the one who gave us our liberties. Secondly, I want you to listen to his overall philosophy of what government is. What is its purpose? What is its jurisdiction? And is it to be doing anything for you and I? And if it is, then what is that specific thing you're supposed to be doing? Another thing that I got from Rick Santorum is that as a public servant, he was 32 years old. He was pretty young when he first stepped into office as a House of Representative, and then he stepped into the Senate shortly thereafter. And when I see on the debates, this is what I notice about him. When it comes to moral issues and moral topics, many people turn their head and scream and run the other way because they're so scared. What will the media possibly say? But what I've noticed about Rick is that he doesn't care what the media has to say. He doesn't care what mainstream candidates have to say. He's willing to speak up on those issues. So I welcome today to the Sons of Liberty, Mr. Presidential Hopeful Rick Santorum. How are you, Rick? And thank you for being with us.
Well, it's great to be on your show, so I'm a few minutes late.
That's okay. Hey, it's good to be in Minnesota, isn't it? I know you're way out there on the East Coast typically in the state of Pennsylvania. Actually, I spent quite a bit of time as a youngster out there because that's where my father's parents live, right out in Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay. Well, that's where I'm from. I'm from the Pittsburgh area, and I'm here in beautiful Des Moines, Iowa right now.
Awesome. Well, let's get right to it because I know that you're constrained for time. Again, folks, if you want to find out more about Rick Santorum, RickSantorum.com, ricksantorum.com. Rick, number one, I want you to speak on this issue, abortion. What is your philosophy? What will your administration promote on the issue and the topic of abortion?
So this is a very interesting topic because I was someone who, when I was in the United States Senate, 5 years into it, I had never said the word abortion on the floor of the United States House or Senate when I was there because, you know what, I was a little nervous about doing it. I mean, there was one thing about being pro-life and voting pro-life. There's another thing about speaking out on it. And this issue came along called partial birth abortion, and I just was abhorred by it. So I muscled up the courage, and, well, long story short, I ended up managing the bill on the floor of the Senate for about 7 years and eventually got it passed. But I have to tell you that, although I'm very happy that we got it passed, I'm happy that the Supreme Court found it constitutional after fighting with them after they said it was unconstitutional. Then we pushed back and said, no, you're wrong, and we got it passed. Since I was at a football game, they used a football analogy. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm concerned that, we have politicians that are worried about, at the 50-yard line and are worried about gaining 2 yards and not focused on scoring a touchdown, mm-hmm. not focused on trying to make sure that in the whole context of everything we do, we talk about what our objective is, and that is that the life of a child in the womb is no different than any other life, that it is human at the moment of conception, it is alive, and it should be given rights under the Constitution, and so that everything we do should be focused on getting to that touchdown. And I have to tell you, I mean, I know a lot of folks in politics on the Republican side, even conservatives, who just talk about some of the side issues, and they're important, fetal pain and a whole bunch of other issues that are attempted to gain 2 or 3 yards.
Yep.
But unless we're stretching the field sometime, unless we're out there talking about the bigger issue, unless we're out there trying to reach for those bigger issues, then, the defense is going to stack up on the line, and we're not going to gain any yards. And so I really do believe that a Rick Santorum presidency would be different than anyone we've seen recently, with one that's committed not just to, gaining the yards we can gain, but also focused on making sure that whatever we do, we focus on scoring the ultimate victory, which is to give rights to every child in America.
So in order to have a child, and I appreciate that perspective, thank you again. Again, you have with the Sons of Liberty, Rick Santorum, presidential candidate here. You can't be a public servant if you won't protect life. That's the number one prerequisite. We are endowed by rights from our Creator. Among these are life. If you don't have life, you can't have liberty or property. So we believe that abortion is murder, straight up and down, and you cannot be a public servant that ensures the rights of mankind if you won't protect that baby. So I appreciate that answer, Rick. I'm going to move on.
Thank you.
Because now we have an issue of education with our children. You have 7 kids, Rick. How do you feel about education and the role of the government in education?
Well, we homeschool the kids. We've been homeschooling for 15 years, and I'm a great believer in a fact. The fact is that the people responsible for educating children in America are the parents of those children, and that the government's role should be, and I'm not against public education. I'm not against the government having a role in making sure its citizenry is educated. But the role of the government should be to work with the parents, since they are responsible for educating their children, and working collaboratively with them, whether it's in a public school or a charter school or a home school or a Christian school or whatever it is, that we should design an education system around the parents' desire to do what is best for their children, and not around creating an institution that parents can sort of drop off their kids and say, well, now it's, I've sort of done my job. I can tell you it's frustrating not only on the part of parents who want to be very active in the education of their children and care that their children are not just taught academics but taught character and morality and spiritual growth, but it's also frustration among teachers who see parents who have been convinced by our society that it's no longer their job. That that once they reach 6 years old, that are 5 years old, that they can sort of drop off their kids, and it's now the government's job to educate your children. Neither works. And so what we have to do is make sure that parents are integrally involved, that educators are open and to designing a program for each child in America, not for children writ large, but for each child in America to maximize their potential.
Thank you so much, Rick. You've answered that question geniusly. Now, here's what's happened is I've asked 2 questions so far. Number 1, I established that you cannot be a public servant if you will not protect life. Now, Rick is dedicated to protecting life. Now, number 2, education. I heard Rick talk about the responsibility of the parent. Where does the jurisdiction of education fall if it doesn't lie with the family? We can't give ourselves over to professionals and expect they're going to do a good job or do a better job than the parent himself who truly loves his kid. Rick has 7 kids. He homeschools them all. God bless you for that, by the way. We homeschool our children as well, and I think that's the best education that you can give a kid if you can give it as the parent to the child. But I want to tie in now. Economics are directly related to morality, and thank the Lord, I have not heard you say one time jobs. Thank you for not saying jobs so far in this interview. I'm getting so sick of that word. It's not the government's jurisdiction to create jobs. They make sure that the playing field is level and that there's an environment for jobs to be created. But economics are directly related to morality. And I'm going to put you on the seat here, Rick. Why are so many people, I want you to speak to 3 things. Why are so many people not bold to speak on these topics? And here's these topics. Gay marriage, and I want to hear your views on it. Don't ask, don't tell. I want to hear your views on it. I want to also hear your views on adding sexual orientation to the definition of hate crime. And finally, I'm sorry, there was 4 here, a constitutional ban on same-sex marriage. So I'll let you have it. Gay marriage, don't ask, don't tell. Same-sex marriage, as far as a constitutional ban, and sexual orientation. And then explain why so few others are not bold to speak on those topics.
Well, I'll answer the last one first, I should say. Last night, Bill Maher goes on his show and said, Rick Santorum is like a Japanese soldier who's stuck on an island after World War II and doesn't know the war is over on the issue of being pro-abortion and pro-gay marriage. That's what he said. Mm-hmm. And the reason that people don't go up and talk about it like I do is because you are vilified. You're vilified by the mainstream media, by Hollywood, by the educational establishment, all of the levers, if you will, of power. Even the conservative media, when it comes to these issues, are hesitant to talk about them. It's not polite conversation. And I stood up from the very beginning, back in 2003, when the Supreme Court was going to create a constitutional right to sodomy, and said, this is wrong. We can't do this. We can't have a constitutional right to consensual sexual activity, no matter what it is. That prior to that case, the court protected sex within the bond of marriage, because that's the sacred bond that government has a role of affirming and taking care of. There was no such thing our founders contemplated to say that any type of sexual consensual activity was constitutionally protected.
That's right.
And so I stood up when no one else did and got hammered for it. And I stood up and continue to stand up. I get all the questions in the debate on the moral cultural issues. I got the question from the gay soldier on Don't Ask, Don't Tell,
Yep.
and stood up and said that it was wrong. I got the question from Chris Wallace the following week, basically called me a bigot, saying this is, I'm anti-civil rights. I do not believe that sexual orientation should be added to hate crimes, but let me be honest, I don't believe in hate crimes, period.
Thank you! Thank you! Did you hear that, America? Thank you, Rick. I was going to bring that up next.
So if you want to go on down the list, I believe that this country is a great country because, as you mentioned, we are given rights by God. And that God is not any God. It's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Amen.
And that God, when he gave us rights, he also said, here are the laws by which your society is to be governed.
That's right.
And we fall short. We're human. We make mistakes. We do things wrong. But what we should do is orient our laws to make sure they are in conformity with the natural law, in conformity with God's law. And we don't. When we don't, we end up in big trouble, and that's where we are in the issue of marriage and abortion. And, now we see because God's laws are not in conformity with what man wants to do now, what are we trying to do? We're trying to constrain religious liberty, throw faith out of the public square because we don't want to hear from God anymore. We don't want our people who believe in God's teachings to have a voice in society anymore because we do not like being told we're wrong. That's where we are right now.
Some people wouldn't want to admit, Rick, but where are you bringing us down to is what the Romans dealt with. It's what Pharaoh dealt with. I mean, ancient civilizations all through time is they're saying we don't want God because he conflicts with our power. We want to be God. Now, I have a caller on the air, and this is a tough question, but I want to give it to you because I know you can handle it, Mr. Senator. This is Brian from Minnesota, and he said we are losing the battle on gay marriage. I would like to hear your feedback to that, but Brian, I'll let you go ahead and present that question to Senator Rick Santorum, presidential hopeful for the Republican Party.
Hi, Mr. Santorum. A big supporter of yours and others as well in the Republican field. I do think that the issue of abortion is different than gay marriage, very much so because of the idea of being consenting adults versus a child. So I'll only touch on the gay marriage issue. And that is that at this point, perhaps we don't have enough homogeneity in our culture anymore that this is an accepted social policy. And as a social conservative, I view gay marriage as an issue that was won or lost in the pulpit, and I don't think we can reinforce it through a defensive action legislatively.
Now, Brian, I'm going to put you on hold. I'm going to let Senator Rick Santorum answer that question. I think it's a fair question. What say you, Rick?
Yeah, I wouldn't argue that the church has not been strong on this issue and has not preached the truth, but that doesn't mean that the people who know what the truth is should abandon it and relegate ourselves to a very, very different society. And I was getting at this a moment ago. This is not about gay marriage. This is about, changing what is right and wrong.
That's right.
And fundamentally changing what people of faith can say and do in society.
Yep.
And the ultimate objective here is to drive faith out of the public square, to drive morality out of the laws of this country, and secularize our society with a very different set of values. And they have a right to do that, by the way. They have a right under the Constitution to come out here and to make their case. But for us to say, well, they've made their case, they're winning, we should quit. I can't accept that. They're not winning, first off. There's been 32 votes in the country.
That's right.
32 different states, from Maine to California, and it's lost every single time. And the reason you're frustrated, because you look at these polls and you listen to culture, and they tell you one thing. But what happens is when people actually focus on this issue and they realize what their second graders are going to be taught, how their values that they hold dear in America. You have about 1% of the population of this country that is gay. And what they're going to try to do is now teach those values to your children in school. They're going to tell preachers and priests and clergy that they simply cannot talk about this issue, that they have to recognize them. They have to affirm them. It's not a matter of tolerance. It's a matter of they're going to insist you agree with them. And if you don't agree with them, you're a bigot. If you don't agree with them, then you are a bad person who at some point should be prosecuted for the way you feel. That is something that, unfortunately, when you just ask this question generally, well, is it okay for people to marry? Well, I guess, yeah, it's okay. But when the debate is had in the states and people recognize what's at stake, people recognize how life will change if this is instituted, then they say, oh, wait a minute, we'll be tolerant, but don't try to fundamentally change the entire moral structure of our country, which is exactly what this is about.
That's right. That's the end of it. Because law, once you create a law, now you have to educate. You got to get people familiar with that law. And God forbid if anybody has views contrary to that law. So now force comes in, and now we're taught and told what to believe. Our founders believed in freedom of conscience. There was no one national denomination because no one would say the way that you served God. Now they're saying God conflicts with us. Get him out of society. Rick, that brings back the hate crimes legislation. And we've got about 2 minutes here, so I want you to put a plug. How can people get in touch with you? How can they follow the campaign? How can they understand more of your views? How do they get more personal with Rick Santorum? Again, I encourage you to visit the website, ricksantorum.com. But going back to the hate crimes issue and federal government stepping in and creating hate crimes, can you explain your position on that? And we've got about 60 seconds, Rick.
Well, I just don't believe that we should we should criminalize actions. We should not criminalize intent, and that somebody's intent, there are lots of reasons that people do bad things, but none of them are necessarily more heinous than the other. You say, well, certain acts, because of your belief structure, are worse than others. I just don't believe that that's a proper basis in the law. And again, we're criminalizing mental activity as opposed to actions.
You got it. All crime is hate, folks. All crime is hate. Rick, we've got about 20 seconds here. Can you put a shot out? How do folks get in touch with you? Where are you going to be next, etc.?
RickSantorum.com, as you said, and you can follow me on Twitter.